What is up, everybody, and welcome to the Blogger Bowl Week 10 college football preview. I cannot believe we are in Week 10 of the college football season. It goes too fast every
This season
single year.
especially. This season has gone faster than any other season.
Well, technically, this season has gone by at the same speed.
No, don't need that. Don't need that.
Science. But anyway, I'm Dan, Matt, and Florida Phil. The whole gang is here. Guys, it is a banger of a week of college football. A lot of good games, a lot of fun stuff to get to. And we also have the Dakota marker game between North Dakota State and South Dakota State. Shout out to our FCS banger of the week. Although maybe not that much of a banger. South Dakota State might just kick the shit out of them. Nevertheless, we will hop right in. And guys, the CFP rankings came out this week. And they are a made-for-TV event that is designed to create content and buzz for college football, and they mean absolutely nothing until the last one, obviously. The committee contradicts themselves from week to week to fit whatever narrative they want to push. I would pay very little heed to them. However, guys, I think one team got really screwed in the initial CFP rankings, and that is the Missouri Tigers. The Missouri Tigers are 15-point underdogs on the road in Athens against number 2 Georgia. The total 55.5. 90% of college football coaching is waging psychological warfare on your own players, and nobody is better at that than Kirby Smart. The committee ranking Georgia number 2 is going to be viewed as the most disrespectful thing that has ever happened to Georgia football inside that facility this week. So to expect a very motivated Georgia team. I set the stage. I've got my notes, obviously. But Phil, what are you looking forward to see when the Tigers head down to Athens on Saturday?
Well, I think we were looking at what's Georgia without Brock Bowers, and it's still an awesome football team.
Still good. Good.
Well, it turns out they're still awesome. And so, I initially looked at this line, Georgia, minus 15, minus 15.5. I'm like, man, that feels kind of steep. Missouri played them super tough last year. Probably should have won that game last year. Missouri is a really good football team, is one of the best receivers in college football. Things are lining up for this to be potentially a close game. And then you look at this line and you're like, man, I feel like it's a trap to pick it. So I am immediately thinking I'm going to hammer Georgia minus 15.5 simply because, again, massive game. They've done it in these big spots. They've had a couple of close games this year. I feel like they've gotten those kind of early season average low moment games out of the way. They're at home. They will, again, feel disrespect by being number 2 in the college football playoff ranking right now. They'll probably feel disrespect with people questioning them without Brock Bowers. Quarterback's playing way better right now, and I think he's gone from is this guy any good? Yeah, he's good. So and it's sad for me, right? Because I'm like, maybe Georgia won't be that good this year, and they're trending in that direction of being really good. Regardless, this will be a game where you see, okay, is Georgia on a clear path towards making the national championship? Is this game super competitive? So again, this is a little bit of a show me test for Georgia, and I think they pass with flying colors this week because, again, don't give them any extra motivation. They have extra motivation and are coming off, I think, probably their most complete and good performance of the year last week.
Yeah, I like Missouri. I think they're a good football team. I think they could beat a lot of football teams in this top 25 that has come out. They played LSU really close at home and very well could have won that football game. But this is just a perfect storm for Georgia to go out and really flex their muscles. They're starting to click. Dan and I talked about Tuesday, the Florida game was very much okay, they're still Georgia. The Kentucky game was a nice sign of that, but then Florida was back to whispers of no Brock Bowers. How good are they? How good is Carson Beck? If Florida can give them a tough game, nope. Georgia just absolutely flexed their muscles as much as I've ever seen them flex their muscles in the last couple of years. And I think this week, while maybe the outside might not be doubting them as much, I feel like a lot of people kind of have the sentiment that we do, that Missouri's a good football team, that this is a motivational spot for Georgia. Like Dan said, Kirby Smart is going to spin this into, you're disrespected. They don't think you're the best team in the country. They think Missouri's better than you. Missouri almost beat you last year, which I think is going to be very valuable for him this week too. It's just a perfect storm.
Yeah. I did some digging to try to parse what Georgia might not do well because we know how good they are in general.
They do everything well.
On offense, the only thing they don't really do well is generate explosive plays. 6th in PPA, 7th in success rate, 12th in points per opportunity. So they're very efficient, but just 96 in explosiveness doesn't really matter for them. That might matter against somebody, if they have to play LSU. That might matter. We'll see what happens. On defense, they're a pedestrian 68th in points per opportunity allowed. So when they do give up opportunities to opposing offenses, which isn't very often, those teams tend to do pretty well in finishing them. They're 41st. They're only weakness is stopping the run. 41st in rush defense success rate, 101st in rush defensive explosiveness. That might be a problem against like Ole Miss next week, but not here. Missouri, 93rd in rushing PPA, 96th in the rushing success rate. They are fairly one-dimensional, but guys, that one dimension is pretty good. When you have Luther Burden, who is the best in the conversation for best wide receiver in the country, I mean, short list with MH Jr., Odunze, a couple other guys. 85% of his snaps come from the slot. So Tyke Smith, who's Georgia's slot corner, he might need some help over the top from some safety help, but like Georgia's going to have the NFL type bodies to try to body Luther Burden as best they can. And Missouri's just going to have to hit big shots and hope that they can hang in this game, because Georgia's just going to do what they do, which is they're just going to efficiently move the ball, score, and put points on the board. So can Missouri hit a couple of big shots and stay in it? If it were in Como, maybe. I'm not super optimistic.
Yeah, like I like Missouri's team, and this is not at all like a knock on them, but Georgia's just starting to be Georgia again. Like I think Missouri still probably goes 10-2 or whatever it is to finish this year. I think they get a good chance to do that. Granted, I didn't check their schedule. I'm just saying that off the top of my head now, but like I think they're a very good football team. I think they can beat just about anybody, just maybe not Georgia on the road at Georgia. I think they're going to fight. I don't think they're going to lay down. I think maybe in the first quarter they're a little frisky, but this is just Georgia's better.
Yeah, I was looking at Carson Beck's ESPN picture, and it's identical to Shaggy Doo. Like I've seen him in like with his helmet on, and he kind of, I was like, okay, he just kind of gives off tall, goofy, long neck.
Yeah, he doesn't. Did he cut his hair? Because I feel like he did an ESPN interview where he had short hair.
But if you go to his ESPN profile,
he's got some nice flow there. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he looks like
Shaggy Doo to the thing. He's just stoned out of his mind.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I think is going to be motivation for Kirby Smart to use is like Georgia's in the middle of this stretch where they play Florida, they play Missouri, they play Ole Miss, they play Tennessee, where it's like, well, everybody said our schedule sucked, and now everyone's saying our schedule, like some of these teams are better. Well, which is it? Blah, 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 blah. The other big game, the biggest game in the SEC this weekend, the most fascinating one, is LSU at Alabama, the tied a 3-point favorite at home, the total 61.5. Am I crazy for thinking this game might be a shootout and the total is too low by a good bit?
What did you say the total was?
61.5.
Yeah.
Oh, it's over.
I think it's going to be like it might be like 28-24 in the first half.
Yeah.
That sounds like a halftime score for this one.
So here's my thinking on it, right? LSU first in PPA, third in success rate, 20th in explosiveness. They do everything well on offense. We know that. The Alabama defense is good, but is there any defense in the country right now good enough to keep LSU from putting points on the board? I don't like to read too much into it. To the week one performances, because week one weirdness is a thing. But since that FSU game, LSU hasn't scored fewer than 34 points. This is the best defense they've faced at this point. One thing I do wonder, can the Alabama crowd get the LSU offense out of rhythm? Can they create procedural penalties? LSU had 6, 6, and 11 penalties in their 3 conference road games so far. And we saw how much Nick Saban really appreciated the crowd against Tennessee. I think he kind of realizes that maybe the crowd's always good in Tuscaloosa, but you kind of get spoiled after a while with how much success they've had. And I think there's kind of been that kind of galvanizing thing that like, hey, it's an entire effort of everybody in that stadium to get things done. On the other side, we know the limitations of the Alabama offense, but the LSU defense is a good matchup for any offense. Alabama is 8th in the country in passing play explosiveness. The one thing that has consistently worked for them this year has been the deep ball. Somehow they're even better behind the chains. When they've had no choice but to throw it, they're first in pass down explosiveness. LSU is 117th in pass defense PPA, 90th in pass defense success rate, and 124th in pass defense explosiveness. They have a 5.58 sack percentage, which is 79th in the country. There's also good news, bad news for the LSU defense. They're going to be without 3 cornerbacks, Denver Harris, Zy Alexander, and Deuce Chestnut, which is bad news. Good news is none of them have played that well. Bad news for LSU is Mekhi Wingo is out for an extended period of time. He is the co-leader in sacks for the LSU team. Matt, what do you think is going to happen? Because Phil's been waiting like 2 weeks to unleash his thoughts on this game, and we're going to roast him.
Phil's the main event.
So Matt, what do you got for this one?
Well, first off, Deuce Chestnut is a fantastic name. I wouldn't have expected that out of LSU. That feels more like a Big Ten name, but Deuce Chestnut, fantastic name.
Denver Harris and Deuce Chestnut. And Denver Harris is obviously a guy who's had a pretty interesting career already in 2 years.
But like this LSU defense isn't good. I know the offense has played pretty well since that Florida State game, but like Dan, you hit on it. Like Bama's offense thrives on the big play, and LSU's defense cannot stop giving up big plays. Alabama's offense seemed to find something in that second half against Tennessee. They played really good football. Like I'm starting to buy into them more. That team as a whole, really since that USF game. I know they had the Arkansas game where they're up big, kind of let them come back into it, but I still think they played pretty well in that game for 3 quarters. I don't buy into Brian Kelly on the road in a big spot in a rivalry game. I know he won last year, and that's kind of also what he does. He wins big games at home against teams that might not be all that good. Like last year, Bama's team was Bryce Young and kind of everybody else. This year, I think the team is playing a little bit better as a whole. Well, they don't have the quarterback. Like I think at home, Jalen Milroe has been very good, and I don't trust Brian Kelly's team to do the little things right on the road, where it's not take penalties, basically not kind of panic, because that's what Brian Kelly did a lot of times at Notre Dame on the road in big spots. Like he would come off as panicked, and usually the team takes on the personality of their coach. And I don't trust Brian Kelly's coaching in a big spot on the road against a team and a coach that are better than them. I do think Alabama is a better football team all around right now, just with how bad LSU's defense is, the injuries they're going to have. And it's close, but like I think Bama's a better football team, or at the very least as good. Saban's a better coach. This is a road environment. We're talking about Kirby Smart having, motivation. Nick Saban's probably been playing that 2-point conversion play in the weight room and in the facility all week. I like Bama. Roll Tide. Phil, tell us why you believe in Brian Kelly on the road in a big spot against Nick Saban.
So, when you wake up for some reason and a thought just like hits your brain out of nowhere.
You're coming back on it, aren't you? You're going back on it, aren't you?
No, because I have principle, so I have to double down on it despite my brain telling me otherwise. So,
this is the Will Arnett means like I immediately regret that decision.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, out of nowhere, I just was sitting at my desk and I woke up and I was like, man, LSU is just going to beat Alabama. Like just beat them outright by like 10 plus points. And I shared it in the DMs and I got roasted for that. And they said, hold any thoughts until 2 weeks from now. Mm-hmm. And so I've had time to marinate on it, and I'm going to double down on it.
Okay, let's hear it.
Here's why. So I think
big game, Brian.
So this game is setting up to be a big time shootout. So far, Alabama hasn't necessarily been in big time shootouts. They've been in games where Jalen Milroe has made a big play towards the end of the game or the start of a half to put the game away. So we saw him not do that against Texas, but we saw him do that against Texas A&M, against Arkansas, against Tennessee, those explosive plays. And so I think this game is going to go back and forth for the better part of 3 plus a little bit quarters. But I think what it's going to come down to is, who do I trust at the end of the game that is going back and forth? Do I trust Jaden Daniels or trust Jalen Milroe? I'm taking the coaches out of this because, again, I don't like Brian Kelly, but I'm going to put just from a player standpoint. And the big matchup that I think is going to come down to is a third and medium to long late in the game, Alabama needing a play, and Harold Perkins coming up, Jalen Milroe not sliding the protection correctly, getting a sack, fumble return for a touchdown. That's where my head's at. And then with Alabama down 10 points late, I think the LSU defensive line led by Harold Perkins will be able to get there. It's just, I can't point my finger to why my brain has been doing this. And I think what it boils down to is that if this was a undefeated versus undefeated or even one-loss LSU, which LSU was knocking on the door of a playoff, I think Brian Kelly would shit his pants. But I think because this is a 2-loss LSU team, I think they're going to play loose. I think they're going to be fine giving up points on defense, and they're going to force Jalen Milroe to beat them through the air. And I think they will get beat through the air consistently through this game until they make a big play at the end. So again, situationally, I think Brian Kelly, with allegedly or supposedly not much to lose here, with 2 losses, not knocking on the door of the playoffs, not knocking on the door of an SEC championship, I think they get it done. And I think they get it done by a turnover late in the game and win by 10 points. So I'm taking LSU outright.
But they are knocking on the door of an SEC championship.
Well,
this is essentially this is
not playoff. Sorry, I meant play. Just player.
But now again, the committee has not put in 2-loss teams before. But the whispers of if LSU beats Bama on the road, runs the table, beats Georgia, those are starting to form. Those are there. That narrative is out there, and people are starting to put that out into the ether.
Well, for my narrative,
Just like last year too, when they said if Georgia runs the table and beats Georgia, or LSU runs the table and beats Georgia in the conference championship game they're in, but then Brian Kelly's team shit the bed at Texas A&M. Those narratives are starting to creep back in there. So they might not be full on, but like I'm not sure they're getting in either way, because I still think the committee will do whatever they can to not put a 2-loss team in there. But that narrative is starting to form again that, LSU, they could run the table. They could beat Bama. They could beat Georgia. They'd be in. Just throwing that out there.
That's fair.
It's just really, honestly, could be like last year and just come down to whoever has the ball last.
It might.
Really does kind of feel like that. I don't believe in the LSU defense at all here. And that just means it feels like we're headed for a shootout. Speaking of games that could be shootouts, Washington at USC getting 3 points at home. This one's going to go on the CLV bonfire for me when the under hits, but the total is 76.5. Phil, I bet this at 71.5 when it opened on Sunday. So I've got 5 points of CLV right now, and the under will hit. Nevertheless, we're going to find out how much want to there is.
You're getting 80 in this one.
Yeah, probably. We're going to find out how much want to there is with this USC team. They're maligned. The vibes have been horrendous for a couple weeks now. Is there leadership from the top down in this program that's going to stand up and get this thing turned around? Washington has played 2 weird games since beating Oregon. Maybe you can just chalk the Arizona game up to being an emotional letdown after that Oregon game. They had a pretty decent success rate, meaning they were able to move the ball okay. They just shot themselves in the dick repeatedly with turnovers. The offense was better against Stanford. They're still not quite as dominant as it was pre-Oregon, but still good. They struggled defensively, though. Stanford was able to keep them off balance and stay ahead of the chains. Ashton Daniels had over 400 total yards and used his leg well. Legs, not one. He has 2 legs. Legs well. I like to see USC try to push Washington around a bit up front. Washington is 130th in line yards allowed, meaning that's the offense that their defensive line is movable. USC needs to get Marshawn Lloyd going and keep the heat off of Caleb Williams. If they can, they've got a chance to win it. But it goes back to what I said at the beginning. To me, like if I had to pick a side, I'd just pick Washington here, just because maybe this is the last stand of Lincoln Riley, but there's a very real chance. I've talked about the ejecto-cito concept before, where things just get really bad for teams who are having bad seasons. Caleb Williams might be ready to shut this thing down. Lincoln Riley might be thinking about the NFL. It could be a bad situation for USC. So kind of a big moment to find out what this program is made of.
Yeah, through the same amount of games, I think Lincoln Riley has the same record as Clay Helton as head coach, which is just
17-5.
I mean, it's brutal, but it's also the way that they've lost some of these games, and even the way that they've won some of these just ugly games. It's just sort of reeks of some of the negative side effects of the transfer portal, where you bring a bunch of super high profile guys in to try to build culture with bubble gum and tape with your leaders of the team being high profile guys, high profile coach, and they just haven't built a tough culture. And that starts with a soft as single ply toilet paper defense. Right. And so without a culture of a tough defense and the pressure always being on the offense, and now the offense losing some of their want to, it just doesn't feel like this is
never works. Never works in football.
It doesn't. It works and it flashes, but it was interesting because the first, 5 or 6 games of the season, everyone was just waiting for USC to implode. And despite them being 5-0, 6-0 heading into Notre Dame,
they were underdogs.
They're heading into that game. Even the vast majority of the media was saying, like, hey, this could be a 4 or 5 loss team. So it's not like they've always had the confidence. They squeaked away early in the year. Again, I don't know what's going on with Washington right now, but they will have more want to. They will have more fight in this game, and ultimately they'll come out on top. I'm tempted to do the over at 76.5 because I don't think either defenses are playing very good right now. What's steering me towards the under is just the USC's offense has not looked the same. It's like Notre Dame kind of broke their brains a bit. Caleb Williams broke his brain a little bit.
Even with the 50 against Cal, like it didn't look the same.
They're struggling a bit. And I think, after the game, I think Caleb Williams had a quote like, hey, I had a great performance or through X amount percentage. I had one bad game. And that's just not a mindset of a tough team or a tough individual right now. Unless he gets drafted by the Bears, then I'll throw my support fully behind him. But for the time being, I think that's just a soft team through and through.
I think you're correct, and you hit everything on USC that I would have hit on. So I guess I'll flip to Washington here. Like the Arizona State win, like that was they played terrible, but Michael Penix was a little bit banged up in that, and I think there's something to the emotional letdown after a big win against Oregon at home. the Stanford game, like they still put up 42 points. They didn't play very well. The defense wasn't great, but like the offense still felt like it got back on track a little bit. This USC defense isn't good. And after those, I mean, we talk about how the first batch of playoff rankings don't really mean much, but like in terms of Georgia using being number 2 as motivation. If I'm Kalen DeBoer, I'm telling my guys, we have the best win of any top 6 team, and they still don't have you undefeated in the playoff. Like that's what people think of you. Like I think that's them being 5, despite having a win over Oregon, who everybody seems to love. We both love Dan. We talked about it on Tuesday, how much we like him. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's a motivational tactic, and I think this is a little bit of a put up or shut up moment for Washington, because there's some disrespect going on around the country, and rightfully so after the last 2 losses, or like, geez, I call them losses, the last 2 quote unquote bad wins, but they also have the best win on the board. And if I'm Kalen DeBoer, I'm using this as all right, you think we're not very good? Let's go. Like if Washington has that fastball, I think we see it on Saturday night in LA.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Like, does that motivational fact? It's like we talk about like Georgia having that attitude. We talk about like Dan Lanning and Oregon kind of having that attitude. Washington kind of gets viewed as a finesse team. Do they have sort of that toughness in them and that kind of fire in the belly, so to speak, if there's any kind of doubt about it? I think that's an interesting point.
And I think it's a spot too. Like Phil, you talk about how down USC is too. Like if Washington goes up early, can they just bury USC?
Yeah. They might. I mean, if they go up early, if Washington goes up
14-0 early, can they put them away?
There's no number that I think I would take USC at. I think if Washington goes up early in this game, you're going to see a lot of quit in USC.
You'll see pretty quick if Penix is dialing against his defense, because USC's defense either like shows up and they're tough or they just roll over on their backs. It's right, and it's pretty immediate right in games too. So that's something to work where it's something where it's, as you said, Dan, like after the first quarter, we'll know how this game is going to go. And not if it's either going to be a tight, close game, or Washington, as you said, is going to march right down the field and score in like 37 seconds. We're going to be like, ooh, this is going to be bad.
Undoubtedly, I agree with all of that assessment. The Big 12, guys, has a huge, huge weekend ahead of it. There's a 5-way tie atop the Big 12. We will be down to at maximum, 3 because we have 2 games featuring the leaders in this conference. And obviously the big one is Bedlam. And we should talk about the Texas game first. However, since I went to Texas, we're going to talk Bedlam first. Oklahoma at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State getting 6 points at home, the total 61.5. This rivalry is called Bedlam. However, the result on the field has been one-sided. Oklahoma leads the all-time series 91-19-7. So 91 wins, 19 losses, 7 ties. That said, boy, it sure feels like Oklahoma State has a chance in this one. It feels like these are 2 teams who are vibes have been going in opposite directions the last couple of weeks. In week 3, Oklahoma State lost to South Alabama 33-7. The next week, they unveiled a secret weapon by the name of Ollie Gordon II. While they lost to Iowa State, Gordon ran for 121 yards. They haven't lost since, and it's been largely on the legs of Gordon. His rushing total the past 4 games, all wins, 136 against Kansas State, 168 against Kansas, 282 against West Virginia, 271 against Cincinnati. He's the first Oklahoma State running back with back-to-back 250-yard performances since
Barry Sanders
in 88. Kansas ran for 253 yards on Oklahoma last week. 54% of their carries went for 4+ yards. Oklahoma is going to be much more physical than they were last week up front. We know that. They were kind of embarrassed defensively in that game. Oklahoma State 82nd in line yards, so Gordon is doing most of the work. Oklahoma's defensive line has been pretty good. That's a matchup Oklahoma can win. They're just going to have to make tackles. Brent Venables is being coy about the status of all their all-everything defensive leader, Danny Stutzman. You also can't ignore the fact, guys, this is the last Bedlam game for the foreseeable future with Oklahoma moving to the SEC. The crowd in Stillwater is going to be a huge factor.
It's a shame this isn't at night.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to see it. I'm also bummed the game is in early November, not late November. So it's supposed to be 72 degrees tomorrow in Stillwater, which is kind of a bummer. Dylan Gabriel really struggled throwing into the wind in Lawrence. It's expected to be breezy in Stillwater on Saturday, so keep an early eye on that. Although the wind, even if it's breezy, not necessarily a factor in that stadium. But if you want to get a sense of what this rivalry is and what this rivalry means, go read the piece on ESPN.com from Chris Lowe. It has Gundy talking about how it devastated his family when he decommitted from Oklahoma and committed to Oklahoma State. And it also has Oklahoma athletic director Joe Castiglione talking about the aerodynamics of frozen turkey legs being thrown at your head after one of the games in this series. Sure. It's a great rivalry. It's a real shame. As a Texas fan, Baylor's not a rival. TCU's not a rival. Texas Tech is not a rivalry. Those are not rivalries. Texas is not losing a rivalry by moving to the SEC. The really, really unfortunate thing about Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC is what appears to be the death of Bedlam, sadly. In that, Matt, what are you looking for? What are your expectations in Oklahoma on Saturday?
Well, first off, I hope this is not like
tomorrow. It's Friday, guys.
I hope this is not like A&M in Texas where there's still really bad hard feelings all these years later. And I hope that somewhere down the line, these two figure it out and put together a non-conference game either at the beginning or the end of every year, because this is a rivalry, even though it's so one-sided, that should be happening every year. Oklahoma State's just such a weird team. We wrote them off earlier in the year. Dan, you mentioned that big blowout loss, and then they lost to Iowa State, who somehow now is, I guess, good and tied atop the Big 12 because that's a thing. But they're just playing really good football right now. And Mike Gundy seems to be doing one of his best jobs he's done there. Ollie Gordon is running as good as anybody in the country. And Oklahoma's in a pretty big letdown spot. I guess I would be a letdown spot because they're coming off a terrible loss. And they are now backs against the wall, ton of pressure. Every part of me wants to take Oklahoma State to cover the 6 and also sprinkle some on them to win this football game. But then I remember the whole 91-19, and I've definitely felt this way before. But at the same time, I think this is Oklahoma State's spot. They're at home. It's their biggest rival. It's the last, it's the last iteration of this rivalry. Their rival's the one that's leaving them. This isn't a mutual thing. This isn't Oklahoma State leaving. This is Oklahoma leaving. I don't know. I tend to lean towards Oklahoma State. Oklahoma showed a lot of, they weren't awful against Kansas. Obviously, they're right there to win the football game. But Dylan Gabriel wasn't great. The defense allows 38 points I know Jason Bean's a solid quarterback, but a backup quarterback. I can't stop shaking the feeling that I think Oklahoma State wins this football game.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm hesitant on them winning outright, but I like them to cover
the 6.
It's again.
I wish I got it at 7. I think it opened at 7.
Some of the factors that you mentioned, the game, being at Oklahoma State, Ollie Gordon wearing 0 is awesome to me. I've loved the number 0. I had a take a couple of years ago that 0 is going to turn into one of the premier numbers in college football when it came out, just because I think it's so awesome, and it's both a fat and a skinny number all in one. It's great. I love it. But he's been playing out of his mind. Oklahoma State has tons of momentum. He only got 3 carries against South Alabama. I don't know if he was banged up. He only got versus the other loss, I think he only had 8 or 9 carries. In the past 3 weeks, he's averaging 29.5 carries and he's put up absurd yards. I don't think that stops. And Oklahoma, coming off of the loss at Kansas, the very, very close win against UCF, the win against Texas, that is a very emotional 3-game stretch. Yeah. And that is, you put so much effort into that as a college football player, so much emotion, so much turmoil going through those highs and lows, where I think the tides are just going to turn in Oklahoma State's favor. Again, it's going to come down to an end of the game situation. So I like them to cover, whether that's a field goal, whether it's a late touchdown, but I'm very excited for this game. I think Oklahoma State definitely covers. Again, coin flip, I think who wins it, definitely leaning maybe 55% Oklahoma State versus Oklahoma. I'm just leaning that way, but not confident enough yet. But again, as I mentioned, I think the pregame and all of that, it's just going to be awesome to watch. If I could pick a game in college football to be at this weekend,
this one,
it would be this one, because the crowds are going to be hostile. This is going to be a very, very hostile environment. And now I know on the outside looking in, we're thinking, oh my God, Oklahoma State is going to bury the Oklahoma fan base. They're going to be pissed. The freaking Boomer Sooner is going to be yelling. But this now really feels heated. But as you mentioned, you hope this is a rivalry that can get back on track with some scheduling down the road, because this is something that's just going to miss.
I think we do see this one eventually. Might take some time, but I do think we see this one.
I think so too. Do I wish this was under the lights at night? 100%. In that case, I think I would pick Oklahoma State definitely to win outright
in their all black uniforms.
If this game also, if it were like 27 degrees in the turf at Boone Pickens Stadium was frozen, I'd pick it too.
Yeah.
The other big game in the Big 12 this weekend, Kansas State heads down to Austin to take on Texas. The Longhorns are a 4-point favorite at home. The total is a paltry 49. So the assessment of Malik Murphy in his first start, not spectacular. He looked like a quarterback who hadn't taken meaningful snaps since the state championship game 2 years ago. We kind of forget, like he got hurt in that state title game. And because his ankle was never right, he didn't really get a ton of prep time last year, never played, got some meaningless snaps this year. So it was his first real game action in a while. The arm strength is there. He can make every throw. The deep ball accuracy might even be better than Quinn Ewers, but you really need some time to get comfortable with the intermediate stuff. He had a bad interception and a bad fumble. Both plays, though, were a result of him trying to do too much, which is something that happens with inexperienced young quarterbacks, and you hope you can settle as he gets more comfortable. The announce crew said that Sark wanted to get Arch Manning some reps in that game, regardless of what happened. Murphy got off to a rough start, and Arch never got in. So it speaks to the comfort level the staff has with Murphy. Also, BYU had like a 9-minute drive in the second quarter, which kind of messed some things up. He's a kid who has swagger for days. If you go back and watch, like he swaggered out onto the field. Like he's a confident kid. I don't think playing poorly early on in that game is going to affect him. And he played better as the game went on, but it's still a tough task. Texas continues to squander scoring chances inside the 10, particularly. They had 2 more drives stall at the BYU 2-yard line. The inability to finish drives cost them the OU game and almost cost them the Houston game. Fortunately for them, BYU was just really bad, and Texas did finish some drives later. Kansas State's defense, 10th in the country in points per opportunity allowed. If Texas cannot finish drives, they're going to be in trouble. On the other side of the ball, after the loss to Oklahoma State, Kansas State started using a quarterback rotation with Avery Johnson, not the coach, as the running quarterback, and it added some dynamism to the offense. They didn't need him last week, but it would be surprising if they didn't use him against Texas, and it was probably a good thing because they didn't have to put anything on film with him last week against Houston. Jalen Milroe had 78 rushing yards against Texas if you take away sacks. Dylan Gabriel had over 100 rushing yards against Texas. The Texas defensive line is the strength of that defense. They got beat up by Oklahoma and didn't play well against Houston. They bounced back against a bad BYU team. If they can't win the line of scrimmage against a good Kansas State team, though, they're going to be in big trouble in this game, guys.
Yeah, and personally, I loved Avery Johnson coming out of high school. He's a guy who, if you go and watch his basketball highlights, he is a freak. He can absolutely slam the ball down. He's one of the best prep players in Kansas last year. Notre Dame was trying to flip him late, and I desperately wanted them to flip him simply because he's obviously a bit raw as a passer, but from a pure athlete standpoint, Notre Dame was like, we can have him as a running quarterback. We could stick him at receiver. He's that type of athlete, and I think for me, they found a way to have a 2-quarterback system and a rotation that works, which is super rare because I think the 2 quarterbacks have such different skill sets where it's really situational, it's really package based, and I think they've done a really, impressive job because that's one of the hardest things to do. Of hey, do we run just with the hot hand here, or do we actually get these guys meaningful reps and split it up accordingly? And so the combination of Will Howard and Avery Johnson, I think gets it done. The last 2 weeks, they've won, 82-3 from a scoring standpoint. So that's obviously inflated some of their offensive numbers, inflated some of their defensive numbers, but they're really good numbers. I think with Quinn Ewers, this game would be different. If it wasn't at Texas, I would for sure be much more confident in Kansas State. And I changed my name to Sorry Dan right now because I'm going with Kansas State outright in this one. I just like the way that they've been playing the last couple of weeks as Avery Johnson gets more integrated into the offense. I think it's going to cause a lot of headaches. Again, as you said, their red zone defense is super strong against an inexperienced quarterback. That's a big matchup, right? A super strong red zone defense against an inexperienced quarterback. So I think a difference in this one is can Malik Murphy hit Xavier Worthy on some deep shots early on? I think that will dictate this game is if he can deliver in a big spot early on this game to soften up the Kansas State secondary. Because if I'm Kansas State, I'm playing them aggressive. I'm playing them hard and loading the box, playing some man coverage on the outside and forcing Malik Murphy's hand. It might backfire on them, but that's the way that I start off the game to push him. So I see this game going with Avery Johnson breaking a long one at some point, Will Howard being steady. and Kansas State winning anywhere from like 7 to 12 points in this one.
At first, I wondered why Phil had watched Avery Johnson's high school basketball highlights, but then I remember that Notre Dame recruited him. I was like, oh no, that actually makes a lot of sense. You guys covered most of it, but I think Phil's point to maybe us knowing early in this one what the result is going to be might be pretty accurate. Malik Murphy, Dan, like you said, was good, not great, kind of shaky at times against BYU, but like if he used that to get comfortable and he comes out against Kansas State and looks comfortable, looks like he's, ready to play, ready for that role, and, is able to be better in the intermediate, hit some deep shots, looks comfortable early, I think Texas wins the football game. But if he comes out and kind of still looks shaky, turns the ball over, and Kansas State gets rolling, like I think this is one where we kind of know early whether or not it's going to be Kansas State's game or not.
And I don't think this is going to be like an Arch Manning savior game. It's clear that he's not like ready for that moment yet, right? Yeah, but it is a narrative that will try to get spun.
Oh, sure.
If they're down 10 at half and Malik Murphy looks bad, that crowd is going to get very restless for Arch.
I don't know if that's the case, but he might panic move. And if they lose this game, I would not be surprised, obviously, if Arch plays after that, if Ewer still isn't healthy. My point in bringing up Arch was to say they said Arch was going to play at some point and never did against BYU. I wonder also, because I think Texas kind of knew BYU had no chance of hanging in that game. Murphy's only thrown 3 passes more than 20 yards down the field so far, and I think all 3 of them were in that game, but they only threw 3 of them, and that's certainly the best thing in his arsenal is that deep ball. So I wonder if Texas kept some things close to the chest with Malik Murphy in hopes that they wouldn't have to, again, put anything on film for this week's game. So real quick before we move on to bets, I don't want to talk about Clemson football, but I guess technically Notre Dame Clemson's a big game. Real quick, Notre Dame Clemson, what do you got? What are your thoughts?
It's unfortunate as a Notre Dame fan that Clemson has lost a bunch of games that they should have won, because I think it puts Notre Dame in a bit of a tough space here. Clemson's defense is still very good. They lost last week after giving up under 250 yards of total offense, and so Clemson's defense is still very good. They're going to be without Will Shipley, which is a huge
by far their best offensive weapon.
One of their starting safety had appendicitis 2 weeks ago too. So they're down some players. Their offensive line is not great. Cade Klubnik, I've never believed in. I don't believe him in now. But I think this one's going to be a bit of a rock fight because Notre Dame's offense has been honestly just sort of subpar with some banged up receivers. So I like the under in this one. It's at 44 last I checked. A big difference here. I'm not liable for that under if Cade Klubnik throws a pick 6 or 2. And my prediction, I think Notre Dame has had 10 turnovers in the past 2 weeks. So they've been playing unbelievably defensive football. I think water finds its level a little bit, and I don't think they get a turnover in this game, which in turn makes this one a lot closer. So I'm looking at like a 24-16 type game that I just am stressed watching the whole time, and I hate every second of it. Just because Clemson's defense is so good and Clemson's offense is so bad. So it's just like throwing a rock at a rock in this one. It's going to be ugly. It's ugly.
Again, I think Phil summed it up pretty perfectly. Like Clemson's 4-4. They haven't played very good football, but that defense is still pretty dangerous. I think them being without Will Shipley is going to hurt, though. Like I might eat my words, but like I'm not really sure how their offense gets much done without Shipley and Klubnik having been so bad. Like they just like NC State, they only put up 17 points, and NC State's defense is fine. But like even Notre Dame was able to put up 45, I think, on them. It feels like a low-scoring game. Feels one that I sweat out a little bit annoyingly until the fourth quarter, but probably like a 20-10 type Notre Dame win. Like it's just ugly. Like Phil, I know you said water finds its level with turnovers here, but like Cade Klubnik's been so bad. And
I think he might go into his shell so much that he's not necessarily taking those chances. This is why
fair enough.
He doesn't necessarily turn the ball over like that.
I see this being a pretty boring game, and it also could be one of those football games that's like every other game is starting the second half, and this one's midway through the fourth quarter because it just flies by.
It's just 2.5 hours, a lot of rushing.
Just quick.
It'll be the one thing which is very curious to me is it's clear like Dabo has been throwing a hissy fit with the Tyler from Spartanburg stuff this week. So does he rally his team and do they rally around him, or are they kind of sick of this shit? It's and you don't know that right now. So this could be a big rallying point for them.
I think it's the cult of Dabo is they'll be fine. I just don't think they're very good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that's missing, which they've always had a dominant wide receiver. And if you look at their wide receiving core, they're just
don't have that.
They're like a mid-tier
time and time again.
Yeah,
and to be fair, like the radio thing was a really bad look for both guys, but one of the pay sites for Clemson, Rivals or whatever, they interviewed Tyler from Spartanburg. And did an interview with him, and he said, "Look, I would have handled things differently." He goes, "I hate the transfer portal. I hate NIL and all that." He goes, "But Dabo Swinney's getting paid a lot of money, and for the success of the program, he needs to utilize those things better than he has." And I was like, "Wow, Tyler from Spartanburg really came off way more mature."
He seems like the adult.
Yeah, he came off like the adult in this conversation.
If you're Dabo, you have to go out, get a kicker, right, in the transfer portal. Like, get a good kicker and get a good wide receiver. It's certain things like that where, could easily have bolstered their team, but instead they pulled a guy who was working a desk job to kick for them because they didn't go into the transfer portal, and that has ramifications. So I'm curious if they rallies around Dabo, if this is like a war cry for him, or if Clemson kind of says F it and rolls over a little bit and then just gears up for a big game against South Carolina.
Like I said, they can rally against the rally for Dabo, but like with their lack of explosiveness on the outside and how good Notre Dame's secondary is and how to bad Cade Klubnik's been, like, I'm not sure it matters. Defensively, sure. Offensively, I'm not sure how much it matters with Shipley out and the lack of talent on the outside.
All right, so we'll move on to our bets for the week. I've got technically 4. I'll go ahead and I'll start us off. I will just tell you, I am a man of principle, so I will not bet the Kansas State money line, but objectively, I would not fault anybody who throws a little sprinkle on the money line. I did bet when both Kansas State and Oklahoma State were 7-point dogs. I did place a 6-point teaser. So I have both of those at plus 13. I also have the USC to over at 71.5. But my actual bets, I'm going to start Ole Miss hosting Texas A&M. Ole Miss -3, laying the 3 with Lane boys. I think Lane Kiffin is a clown who cares more about clicks than he does wins, if I may borrow from Dan Lanning. But he's been consistent enough his trolling of Jimbo Fisher, and I think he can get Jimbo Fisher and A&M on tilt here. Last year, he joked about A&M paying the luxury tax to land the recruiting class he did. This week, he said you'd have to think A&M would win 10 games every year with the roster that they have. Just Lane being Lane. This is also a bigger game for them than the Georgia game next week. He knows he can't beat Georgia in Athens, but a 10-2 season with losses at Alabama and Georgia is a great season regardless of how you feel about him as a coach. Texas A&M doesn't finish drives very well. I think that's a death knell on the road. Guys, hold your nose. I really hate that I have to do this, but one of the most successful, one of the most reliable bets in all of college football, guys, is the Nard Dog. That's Pat Narduzzi as an underdog. Pittsburgh getting 21.5 against Florida State at home. Am I riding with a coach who pissed off his entire roster by throwing them under the bus last week? Yep. However, I do think that having to do some damage control there on his part might actually be a good thing for that program. I also think Florida State going to play close to the chest with what they show this week because they have Miami next week. I think they're just going to go up there in a game where I don't even know what the weather's going to be. I'll look it up in a second. But it's going to be, that there's going to be nobody in that stadium because nobody goes to pit games. The weather's probably going to suck because it's probably going to be cold regardless. And it just seems like it's going to be a kind of, let's just go up there and get a win.
And Florida State has done that at times against this year against those teams on the Boston College game comes to mind. Even last week, I know they I think they might have ended up covering last week, but at times against Wake, they were just kind of looked like they were going through the motion. So I hate that, but I don't hate that.
Yeah. I hate having to back them, but I'm going. And then I have a couple of bets on the LSU-Alabama game. I was looking for a way to get in on this. I thought about just taking the over, but knowing me, I overcomplicated things. They have a player prop, guys. Jaden Daniels, 1+ passing touchdown in each half at plus 115. I thought
Where's that at FanDuel?
FanDuel. I thought I was being trolled there. So I profit boosted that to plus 173. So it's Jaden Daniels 1+ touchdown in each half. And if you saw the tweet, guys, I said I found a banger of a player prop. And there's very, very little chance this actually hits. But do I give a shit? Absolutely fucking not, guys. Threw just a cup of coffee on this. But it's Jaden Daniels and Jalen Milroe to both have 2+ passing touchdowns in each half. So at least 2 passing touchdowns in each half for both of those quarterbacks at 130-1. That was worth a 5 spot.
That's not crazy by any stretch.
Yeah, why not?
So it was like, to hell with it, I've got to do it. So almost -3 Pitt minus 21 or plus 21.5, excuse me. Jaden Daniels a passing touchdown in each half at plus 115, and then the Daniels and Milroe to each have 2 passing touchdowns at least in each half at 130-1. Florida Phil. So you're gonna be able to bet legally there soon. Am I not mistaken?
I think it's Hard Rock, right?
Yeah, not yet, but it's coming. But a game that I can bet on is the Iowa Northwestern under 30.5 at Wrigley. That is just gonna be.
It's up to 30.5 now.
Yeah, it's up to it's up to 30.
It's 29 and it opened at 29.5.
Yeah, so I'm still gonna bet the under in that game. I mean, it's just you have to. I mean, it's at the time it opened as the lowest under in college football history. So you gotta roll with that, right? It's almost sacrilegious not to. So rolling with that, Georgia minus 15.5, Oklahoma State plus 6, Michigan minus 32.5 against Purdue because I hate myself. LSU outright and Kansas State outright. So I have a pretty big card for myself today, but with the Michigan one, Purdue stinks. They're going to go out and
I don't know. They can't steal signs. And I mean, we cannot stress enough. Michigan stole the sanctity from college football.
Yeah, granted, I hate
maybe
Michigan.
That fires up Purdue.
I hope they burn. I hope they both get sanctioned and lose to Ohio State. So it's a double kick them in the nuts. But at the same time, I think they are going to be super pissed off this week. They're going to win and be like, look at us. We didn't need to steal signs against Purdue. And it's just going to be annoying, and I'm going to hate every second of it. But I think they're going to roll it. They're going to play really well. And everyone online is going to be so annoying on both sides of it. And I don't want to deal with it. But I think they're going to roll. So I would roll the 32.5.
I just don't think I can even watch that game. I'm just not ready. I just feel like the innocence, the beauty, the everything that's great about college football has been stolen by that winged helmet. And I don't think I'm ready to watch it. I'm not there yet. Maybe I'll get there. I don't know, maybe next week later, something like that. Maybe, I don't know if there's a big game that maybe they play in, I don't know. But for this week, I can't get there.
In the off chance that they play poorly this weekend, that would be the most literally comical thing of all time.
Maybe for whatever reason, if I happen to check my phone and it's a close game at halftime, maybe then I become ready to watch it, but I'm just not ready to watch them right now. All right, my card. I'm going to take that Notre Dame Clemson under 44.5. I don't see how it gets over with both defenses and both offenses not being very good. Ole Miss, I'm going to lay the 3. That line stinks to me, and I don't know why it's so close, but I can't get into Texas A&M. I don't think they're very good. South Carolina even gave them problems at times last week. I like Ole Miss in that spot. I'm going to take Kansas State plus the 4.5. I'm not ready to go ahead and take their money line yet.
Sprinkle it, coward. Sprinkle.
No, Dan, I'm not going to do that because I'm loyal to you. All right, I'm a loyal friend and a loyal co-host.
That's reverse hedging, Dan. He'll get sweet delight out of you losing that bet. It's a double reverse jinx, man.
I don't. That's too many. That's too many things for me to think about. Oklahoma State plus 6. I'm going to lay the 15.5 with Georgia. I am taking it's under 31.5 now. Iowa Northwestern on FanDuel. That's where I'm at now. Taking that, I'm going to then also take the over in Alabama-LSU. Over still 76 in USC Washington, and I'm going to lay the 4 with Washington.
There you go. I was looking to see the Iowa games at Wrigley.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh boy. I was looking to
see
grosser. Yeah, I was looking to see who led the Cubs in home runs, and I think it was Bellinger had 26. I was wondering,
do you guys remember? Do you guys remember a couple years ago when the Northwestern game at Wrigley where they had to
go one side.
They were just going one direction.
I wish that was a yearly thing. So I wish this year they just did that again, where it's hey,
I still don't know how that happened. How do you mess that? Football had been played at Wrigley Field before.
Someone just after they painted the lines, they're so the end zone goes into a brick wall.
Yeah, we can't have that. Sorry, guys. My bad.
My final thought before we go, because I'm not going to talk about this game on the recap show. TCU lost to Texas Tech last night, which means they do have Baylor left on the schedule, which I'm assuming they're going to win that game. I know I guess you can never assume anything. But TCU is going to need to beat either Texas or Oklahoma to get bowl eligible after playing for a national title last year. Do you know who the last team to miss a bowl game after playing for a national title was?
Yes. I don't want to talk about it. We're not going to talk. Is it not Notre Dame?
Oh, I thought the note I saw said that it was Texas.
No, I thought it was going to be Notre Dame.
That was 2015 going into 2016. So that was not. It was 2012.
Oh, I thought Oh, I mixed up my years. Yeah, I thought for whatever reason I had in my head the 3-9 year happened after the national championship game, but it was a year or two before.
Yeah.
No, yeah, Texas went 5-7 the year in 2010, the year after losing to Alabama in the Rose Bowl. So shout out.
Well, you lost Colt McCoy. I mean,
they did. There were a lot of mistakes, as the phrase is, mistakes were made. So on that note, we will wrap it up for the day. We appreciate everyone tuning in to the show. We'll be back on Tuesday to recap an awesome week. Look at lines for another awesome, guys. I will say this, like November, I know the season is rapidly coming to a close. Oh, yes, Matt?
The system went 5-2-1.
There we go.
Maction system 5-2-1. And we were on Tuesday night, Buffalo had first and goal from the 7. And if they score, the over and Buffalo hits, but they didn't score and they didn't kick the field goal, which they technically should have to make it a 2-score game. But we were that close to being 7-0-1.
So we'll talk about whatever. I don't even know what the games are. We'll talk about whatever the action games are.
Doesn't matter. Underdogs.
We'll talk about Michigan finally playing a team with a pulse. Not much of one, but a pulse. And we will, of course, recap everything that happens this week in the world of college football. For Florida Phil, for Matt, I'm Dan. We will talk to you next week, and we hope you all have a very successful week with all of your college football bets. We'll talk to you later.